Okay, so in these Zoom sessions we've been having each week, what we've been doing is just going through the assignments for the Module 5 assignments for Second Timothy, and just each session trying to cover one of the assignments and just review the uh, the specifics, the requirements for the assignment, take a look at the assignment, just help prepare you to get those done. The next few sessions, we're going to focus our attention on two assignments in particular because they are new or more extensive than what we've done before. Because the first three assignments were just looking at the book as a whole, right? You had to read and observe the book of Second Timothy, and then the background context of Second Timothy, the and then the contextual flow or the literary context of Second Timothy. And some of you guys did a good job staying up on those assignments, and we've been covering those together. Today, I'd like to move to the next assignment, which is something you haven't done yet before, and that is to do all of the connector words in the book. So in Second Timothy, this next assignment is to try to find all the connector words in book of Second Timothy in order to prepare you for the next assignment, which is to block diagram the letter to Second Timothy. So one of the steps to do that, of course, is, we're trying to identify all of the phrases and all of the clauses. And to do that, we need to find the connector words because those separate the phrases and clauses. So what I wanted to do is basically give you one assignment where you just look for the connector words. And then the next assignment, you'll work on the diagramming. So with that, uh, we're looking at assignment 5.11, which again is the connector words for Second Timothy. Okay, for all four chapters. So to do that means we did some review at when we were together when we started Module 5. So I want to sort of pick up where we were from that, cover a few things with you, and then hopefully get to the example for the assignment and do a little bit from Second Timothy as an example. So again, remember the first three steps that we looked at is the book as a whole. And now as we get to the fourth step, this is where we begin to narrow our focus onto the particular passage. And so we first diagram the passage, then do the textual observations, look for significant words, consult resources. Again, all of these are not new steps at all. We've done them for every single genre, every passage that you've done essentially, except for the Psalms passage. We didn't do the first three steps. But so there's nothing new as far as things we have to learn for the assignments for Module 5 for Second Timothy. But like I said, we'll be doing a more extensive examination of the connector words and then the diagram, because we're going to do the whole letter of Second Timothy. And of course, as you remember, to do the diagram, as I just mentioned, you first identify the independent clause, the first independent clause, we should say, of the sentence, and then identify the rest of the phrases and clauses. And how do we do that? By identifying those connector words. And then after we do that, then we figure out where each phrase and clause goes and what it modifies, how it modifies that. But what I would like to do today is we're just going to focus on what is necessary and helpful to do this second step. And that is identifying the rest of the phrases and clauses. And we do that by uncovering those connector words. And of course, hopefully, this will just be a quick review. But if you remember the connector words, the first kind that we looked at is the conjunctions. And again, those simply join. There's two kinds. Remember, coordinating, subordinating. Coordinating is coordinate. That means equal. So coordinating conjunctions bring two equal ideas. They join two parts of a sentence that are grammatically the same, and that can be two words, two phrases, two clauses. Um, the coordinating conjunctions are essentially just these five: and, nor, but, or, yet. So I've told you to memorize those because there's only five and they're the most common. And if you see those, you know right away, okay, it's a coordinating conjunction. So it's going to connect two things that are equal in the sentence, two things that are grammatically the same, either two clauses, two phrases, two prepositions, two participles, um, those two prepositional phrases. It will be connecting two things that are equal. All right. But subordinating, again, is the idea that joins two unequal parts of a sentence, meaning that specifically a subordinating conjunction subordinates the clause that follows it. Again, a clause always follows a subordinating conjunction. Remember, a clause is a group of words that go together that contain a subject and a verb. Okay, so that's the coordinating, or sorry, the clause. And then the phrase, if you'll remember, is simply it's a group of words that go together that do not do not contain both a subject and a verb. Okay. Now, a subordinating conjunction introduces a dependent clause. So it's a clause, but it's a dependent clause. It relies on something else in the sentence to give it meaning and understanding. And so subordinating, again, coordinating brings two things together that are equal. Subordinating brings a clause in that's dependent. That means it's unequal. It modifies, it depends on, another word, in the sentence. So when we talk about connector words, one category is conjunctions, very common category. Two kinds, coordinating, and again, those would be just these five, and boy, and then subordinating, which includes, there are many subordinating ones. These are the most common. Okay, and then if you remember in your syllabus, at the very end of the syllabus, the last in the appendix section, one of the appendices has the whole list of all the connector words. So it lists almost all of the coordinating or all the subordinating conjunctions in English. Okay, so you can refer to the syllabus for that. So one category of connector words, conjunctions, very common. The other most common category of connector words is our friend, the prepositions. And if you remember, prepositions, they link nouns to the sentence, to a word in the sentence. So a prepositional phrase, again, there won't be a subject and a verb with the preposition. They link nouns to another word in a sentence, and they contain a preposition and a noun. Okay, and the nine most common, by far, the nine most common prepositions are these: at, with, for, from, by, of, on, and to. If you'll remember, there's like over 150 prepositions in English, but these nine are the most common. You've got a list of almost all prepositions in English in that appendix as well. Okay, so you can refer to that if you want. But the more of these common connector words that you memorize, the easier it's going to be for you. So you don't have to keep going back to the syllabus and, okay, I'm looking through the whole list. Just remember these nine for the prepositions, and then remember and boy for the coordinating conjunctions, and then try to remember as many of these as you can for the subordinating ones. If you can do that, there's really about maybe 30 connector words. If you can memorize them, you'll capture a large percentage of them and be able to do it very quickly. Okay. So for prepositions, a whiff boot is a good acronym to remember for these nine. Okay. Now, there's a couple of others, one in particular, and I see this commonly misunderstood. according to. Okay, according to is a preposition. So, for example, God has poured poured out his grace according to his great mercy, or something like that. Okay, according to is the full preposition, not just to. Okay, according is not a participle. It's not a verb. It's just one of those things in English which it forms a preposition, and it means how. It usually is telling us how something is done. We are saved according to God's grace. That's how we're saved. Or we could say we are saved by God's grace. But according to is a full preposition. So keep that in mind as you're looking. It's not part of a with boot, but it is fairly common in English, in the Bible translation, English Bible translations. Okay. It's not as common as these 9, but it's fairly common. So that's why I pointed out. All right. So keep that in mind as well. And then the other thing to watch out for, guys, when you're looking for the prepositions, of course, to is a preposition, right? It's part of a with boot. Notice here, to. It's one of the common ones. Very, very common preposition. But when it's with a verb, it's not a preposition. It's not acting like a prepositional phrase anymore. It's an infinitive. All right. We discussed this in class a little bit. We may cover them in more detail a little bit later, but just keep this in mind. An infinitive generally, sometimes it acts like a connector word, usually doesn't, but sometimes it can, but it's not the same as, so for example, if we're looking at, I went to the park, okay? So here, to the park is a prepositional phrase. Notice it's to plus a noun. Park is a noun. Now, if I said, I want to go to the park, all right, we still have to the park. That's a prepositional phrase, but to go here is not a prepositional phrase because it's to plus, notice go is a verb. All right. I desire to know Christ. Okay, that's an infinitive. Know is a verb. Now, if I say I commit my life to Christ, okay, now Christ is a noun. So this is a prepositional phrase. Okay, why does this matter? Well, in this case, to the park tells us where I went, but to go goes with want. This is all the whole verbal idea. I want to go. Now, to the park is part of to go, but where I'm going to go. But this to go doesn't modify want. It's part of the verbal idea. It's if you just say I want to the park, that doesn't make sense. So to go completes that verbal idea. Okay. Same thing here. We could say I desire Christ. That would be a possible idea. But when I add this to know Christ, that's telling me something else. It's what I desire. In the first case, I desire Christ just means I want Christ. But when I say I desire to know Christ, that's saying something a little bit different. Or you could say I desire to follow Christ. Okay. So in this case, it's not I desire Christ. Christ is not the object of desire. It is actually to follow is what I desire. I desire to follow Christ. You guys following? You guys following me? Okay, so keep that in mind when you're looking for prepositions and you see that preposition to, don't automatically say, oh, prepositional phrase. It may be an infinitive. And the easy way to figure that out is just look, is there a verb right after? Okay. So to bed, that's prepositional phrase because bed is a noun. To uh, to um, to run. Okay, run's a verb. So this would be an infinitive. Okay. Any questions on that? Hopefully that makes sense. Infinitives they are Greek. There are infinitives in Greek. They function similar to those in English. Infinitives can be subjects, can be objects, can have a verbal idea like I want to go. But they have they're very versatile in how they are used. Okay. Sometimes they might modify something. Often they complete a verbal idea. Um, but they have different uses. So, for example, I could say, I need to run for my health. Okay. Now, let me ask Kazot to run here. Is that a infinitive or a prepositional phrase? You're muted.
Infinitive, Pastor Tim.
How do you know that?
Verb run.
Yes, it's followed by a verb. Okay. So this is an infinitive. Now, in this sentence, it goes with the verb need. I need what? I need to run. Okay, that's the full verbal idea. So here it's acting in a verbal sense. But if I had said to run is good for my health, well, notice here now, again, to run is still an infinitive, but in this case, it's the subject of the sentence. To run is the subject here. Is my verb, right? So we have a subject, verb, and then remember object complement, good. So uh, this is just shows that it has these different kinds of uses. So all you need to worry about right now is just look for a verb. What follows the two, a verb or a noun, and you don't have to worry about this for other prepositions. Technically, there are a few cases where other prepositions might be followed by a verb, but all you got to do is just look and see what follows the preposition, especially if it's the word to. If a verb follows it, okay, infinitive. If it's a noun, preposition. That's all you got to worry about. Because if it's an infinitive, then it may not be functioning as a connector word. It usually doesn't. Okay, so that's why I'm pointing this out. Okay. Okay, so we've got conjunctions, subordinating, coordinating, and then we have prepositions. And then, of course, watch out for the infinitives. They show up from time to time. And then probably the easiest one, the connector word that we all love, our favorite one, is the relative pronoun. Because there's only a few of them to worry about. Okay. Relative pronoun is a pronoun. Again, remember, a pronoun points to or represents another noun, right? So it just points to pro comes from the idea of toward. So pronoun points to a noun, right? It just represents a noun, right? You know these he, she, I, they, we, him, her, um, himself, herself, right? These are all these are all pronouns. Okay. There are relative pronouns who, which, and sometimes that, which introduce a dependent clause. Okay. And they'll modify uh, another word in the sentence. But usually, like I said, they're who, which, or that, or sometimes you'll have the term whoever, whichever, whom, but you'll see that who or which in the uh, in the word. Okay, so whenever you see who or which, automatically think relative pronoun. Sometimes that can be a relative pronoun. And we discussed this in class, the examples for that. How do I know? Well, if I can replace that, I am the man that preached the sermon. Okay, here, if I can replace that with which, and it makes sense. So if I put I am this or who, which or who, I am the man who preached the sermon. Yeah, that makes sense. So that here is functioning like a relative pronoun. Okay, and we have some examples of that in your notes. You can go back and look in the syllabus from the class on that. But the relative pronouns are a connector word that's usually pretty easy to spot because you'll see one of these three words in it. Okay, again, reminding us that the word that can have different functions sometimes. Okay, so those are the relative pronouns. Now the fourth and last connector word is the most difficult one. So I wanted to spend a little time. We did in class, but I want to look at these again because they're just hard. They're harder than the others. Okay, and the reason is because the way they look is very similar to other kinds of uh, words in English. Okay, if you remember, a participle is a word ending, a verb, sorry, verb ending in ing or ed. Okay, but not all verbs that end in ing or ed are participles, and this is why it's tricky. Okay, a participle is a verbal that modifies another verb or a noun. Now, regular verbs do not modify. Okay, regular verbs are. That's because they are the action of the subject, action or state. They don't modify. They are the action in the sentence, right? So if we say I preach the word, where's my verb here? Preach, right? Preach doesn't modify. That's the verb. It doesn't modify anything else in the sentence. It is the action of the subject. I. It's stating what I am doing. I preach the word. So a verb, regular verb, is not a modifier, but a verbal, that is a word that contains a verb but doesn't act like a verb, can modify. We've already seen one of these, the infinitive. That's a verbal. It looks like a verb, but it doesn't act like a verb, right? To know, right? Or I used the example before. I want to go to the park. So to go is not a regular verb. It's an infinitive. It's a verbal. So it has a verb in it. It looks like a verb, but it doesn't act like a verb. Same with participles. They look like a verb, but they don't act like a verb fully. They may have some verbal aspects to it. And so this is what makes it hard, is because it can look like a regular verb because it ends in ing or ed. All right, so this is what makes these participles a challenge. Um, they can be very, very difficult for us to figure out at times. All right, so I want to go over these a little bit more and look at, try to give you some ways to um, how to know, okay, is this a regular verb or is this a participle? Or it could be something else. So I want to give you some help in trying to identify that, because the participles are probably going to give you the most problems in looking for connector words. They're going to be the most challenging or difficult to consider. Okay. Any questions so far before we dive into this? I know this is your favorite subject. I know you were excited to go over this right today, but it's one of those things, we call it in English, there's a phrase we use, a necessary evil. That means it's not very fun, but we have to do it. It's important. So participles are a necessary evil. They're not evil. You know what I mean? That's just an idiom, a phrase that we use in English, but they are an important thing that we need to understand, even though they're not easy or fun at times to try to figure out. So, okay, let's look at them again. Like, it's the form of the participle. Has a verb with the root, a verb root. That means it's a verb with an ending in ing or ed. Okay, now how do participles function? Because participles are not a regular verb, let me write this out. Because participles are not a regular verb, that means they modify another word in the sentence. Okay? I should put that here. This is important. All right? They don't act like a regular verb. Again, remember, regular verb, I preach the word. Preach here is a regular verb. But if I were say, um, the the pastor was in the pulpit preaching the word. Okay, now here, preaching, notice it has the form of the participle. Okay, it ends in ing. It's a verb plus ing. And in this case, it is a participle. It's modifying what would be in this case? Was. All right. It's indicating the action that he was doing. Okay, so preaching the word is a phrase, right? There's no subject here. All right. The independent clause is the pastor was in the pulpit where he was. What was he doing there? He was preaching the word. Okay. But in this first sentence, I preach the word. Preach is a verb and it's acting like a verb. It's not modifying anything else. In the second sentence, preaching is a verbal. It's a participle. It looks like a verb, but it's not acting like one. And it will modify. Okay? So how do participles modify? Well, they do this in two ways. They can modify a noun or a verb. All right, if you'll remember in our parts of speech, there are just four basic parts of speech in English. There's four basic, parts of speech. That's the right term. There's a noun or a verb, okay? or adjective or adverb. Those are the four fundamental building blocks. When you look at a phrase or clause, that's what they're going to be typically made up of. All right. There's a noun, verb, adjective, or adverb. Okay. And of course, a noun, a person, place, or thing. A verb expresses an action or mode of being, right? And an adjective modifies a noun. An adverb modifies a verb or another adverb or adjective. So participles can act like an adjective. That is, they can modify a noun, or they can act like an adverb. That is, they can modify a verb or another adjective or adverb. Okay? And they answer these questions: when, where, why, how. Remember we talked about those in class? So a participle then can act like an adjective or an adverb. A participle does not act like a noun, and it doesn't act like a verb. All right, so it doesn't act like either of these, noun or verb, but it can act like an adjective or an adverb. Okay? So let me see here. I think I had an exercise here I wanted to do. So let me do this here. I'm going to have one of you read, I have a couple passages here. We'll read, and then I'm going to have you guys go through and just identify what participles you see in the passage, okay? So let's do that here for Ephesians chapter 5, verses 18 to 21. I'm going to ask Pastor Allen if you could read this text, Ephesians 5, 18 to 21.
Ephesians 5:18 to 21. And do not get drunk with wine, for that is dissipation, but be filled with the Spirit, speaking to one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing and making melody with your heart to the Lord, always giving thanks for all things in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ to God, even the Father, and being subject to one another in the fear of Christ.
Great, thank you. Okay, so let's take a look at this. We'll just look at it verse by verse, and I want to see if you guys can identify the participles here. So, Alan, you read the passage. I'll start with James. James, looking at verse 18, do you see any participles or possible participles there? Again, we're looking for a verb plus ing or ed. Do you see anything like that in verse 18? Filled is possible. Okay. It says, but be filled with the Spirit. So is there a subject to this? Filled, be filled?
Yeah. You.
It's you, right? Remember, this is a command here. Be filled with the Spirit. So there's an implied subject. And since there is a subject to that, this is acting like a regular verb, not a participle in this case. Now, it looks like it because of that ed, huh? But in this case, it is not. So there's a couple clues to take note of, and we'll talk about this in a little bit. Notice one, there's a subject, you, because this is a command, be filled. And two, notice there's a verb of being there right before the word filled. Be filled. Remember the verbs of being? We have be, am, become, were, are. Okay. So if you see one of these verbs of being in front of that word that looks like a participle, then it's not one. I'll go through that in a little bit more detail in a moment. All right. Okay, James, how about verse 19? Speaking, yes. Good. Any others in verse 19? Singing. Yep. Making. Good. All right, excellent. How about Noor? How about you, verse 20? Do you see any
Giving.
giving? Yes. Sorry, can't hear you.
None, no more.
No more than 20. How about 21?
21. Being, I do not know.
Yes. In this
Yes.
case, it is. All right. Good. Yeah, all of these are participles. They don't have a subject in front of them or a verb of being. So they're all modifying something else in the sentence. In fact, they're all modifying be filled. I think they're describing the result, what happens when you are filled. Speaking to one another, singing and making melody, giving thanks, being subject. So those are 5 participles that would all come under be filled. Okay? All right, good. Questions on that? So be filled is not a participle. And again, I'll go into more detail about that in a little bit. Okay, let's do another passage. Kazot, I'm going to have you read this one. Ephesians 6, verses 5 to 9.
Ephesians chapter 6, verse 5 to 9. Slaves, be obedient to those who are your masters according to the flesh, with fear and trembling in the integrity of your heart, as to Christ, not by way of eye service as men pleasers, but as slaves of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart, serving with good will as to the Lord and not to men, knowing that whatever good thing each one does, this he will receive back from the Lord, whether slave or free. And masters, do the same things to them, giving up threatening, knowing that both their master and yours is in heaven, and there is no partiality with him.
All right, very good. Kazot, why don't you take a look and let us know, do you see any participles in verse 5?
Trembling.
Okay, so trembling looks like one, but notice here, with fear and trembling. So it
Ah,
follows a preposition, doesn't it?
yes, yes, Pastor Tim.
So it must be a noun.
No.
Notice it follows a preposition. And just if you are familiar with the English vocabulary, trembling would be can be a noun. Sometimes it can act like a verb. And again, I do this a lot, but I have to apologize for my language, English, because there's so many exceptions, right?
Very catchy words, Pastor Tim.
Yeah, there's so many words that can function differently, but look the same. So like trembling. If the sentence had said I am trembling, that would be a verb. But in this case, with fear and trembling, it's trembling is a noun. So sorry. But so you kind of have to see what it's doing in the sentence. That's why I talked about prepositions. What follows a preposition will be a noun if it's a prepositional phrase. Now, if it's the preposition to plus a verb, that could be an infinitive. But here we have with, fear and trembling. So it's not an infinitive. It's with as a preposition. So trembling has to be a noun in this particular case. Okay. All right. Let's go back to any other. So trembling is not. So we're going to put that in another color just so we're not tricked by it. Or I'll just leave it. There any other in verse 6, Kazo?
Doing, Pastor Tim.
What's that?
Doing.
Oh, doing.
Still.
Oh, you're in verse 6. Okay. Yes. Doing, yeah. Now doing is a participle. What about, sorry, I missed up in verse 5. What about this word according? Is that a participle?
According to. It's a preposition.
Yes. Yep, you're right. According to is a preposition. All right. So according, even though according might look like a possible one, look, it's followed by to. So that's a special preposition in English, according to. And it's on the list there in the syllabus. So according to is according is not a participle. Okay, now verse 6. Yes, doing the will
Serving,
of
Pastor
God.
Tim.
Okay, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Serving.
Yeah, verse 7. Serving is a participle. Any others in verse 7? I don't see any there. Okay, how about let's go to Alan. Alan, how about verse 8? Do you see any?
Verse 8. Knowing.
Yes, knowing.
That's all. Verse 8.
Yep, I think you're right. Knowing whatever good thing, thing is a noun, knowing. Let's see what's about the slave. Okay, how about verse 9? Do you see any there?
Verse 9. Giving.
Yes. Giving?
Yes, giving. Yes, giving. Threatening.
Okay, so giving is one. Okay, now.
Threatening is different.
Yeah, threatening is the object of giving up. Threatening here is actually a noun.
Yeah. Knowing.
Knowing, yes, knowing is participle.
Yeah, that's all.
That's it. Okay,
Yes.
good. Now, by the way, participles are very common in the New Testament. Participles are very often used in Greek, very often, and do have similar functions to participles in English. They're not exactly the same, but they're pretty close. So again, by learning participles in English and how they function, how they work, you're actually also learning how they function in Greek. Now, in Greek, they don't end in ing, of course. That's an English thing. But in Greek, it's easy, very easy to spot participles. It's not tricky in Greek. English, it's tricky because there are many different words that end in ing or ed that aren't participles. But in Greek, the Greek form, there's a certain form for participles in Greek. So they're easy to spot. But not so much in English, but they do function in a similar way. in both languages, okay? So with that, what I'd like to do is first ask, are there any questions? We went over participles in some detail during the module together, but I wanted to review them a little bit just to refresh you on them because they are the most difficult. We're going to, in a minute, I'm going to go through and sort of give you some hints how to identify participles a little more easily. But before we do that, I wanted to make sure to answer any questions you might have, or if you have any comments or thoughts. Does anybody have anything to this point? Okay. Now what I want to do is I want to spend a little time on this word that I brought up a little earlier called verbals, English verbals. Because as we've just seen, not all verbs that end in ing and or ed are participles. All right. Why is that? Well, because present tense verbs can end in ing. Past tense verbs can end in ed. All right. And there's also a few other kinds of words that can end in ing or ed. So one really needs to carefully examine the sentence like we did before with that word threatening. We have to see, oh, okay, I've got to look a little bit carefully here. Oh, threatening follows with. Okay, with is a preposition. So threatening is acting like a noun here in this sentence. It's not a verb or a verbal or participle. All right, so you have to pay attention to what that word is doing in the sentence. Okay, and that'll give you a clue as to whether or not it's a participle. Now, as I said, a participle is under the category, broader category of an English, a verbal. Okay, and so English verbals are sort of this class, a particular class of words that we have in English that can look like a verb, but they don't act like a verb. That's basically a simple way to think of them. Okay, so how do we know? How do we know if we have a participle? That's the big question. Okay, or is it a regular verb? It looks like a participle, but it's acting like a verb, or is it something else? Okay, or it could be a participle, a regular verb, or it could be a noun. And we call in English a gerund. You guys remember that word? We talked about this a while ago. I don't know if it's a gerund is just a fancy word for a verbal that's functioning like a noun. I'll show you some examples. Okay, so let's take a look. We have the NBA playoffs happening. In fact, I think Denver just won today, championship, for those of you that care. I know, Kazo, you do, right? You've been following. You're probably watching it, right? We're watching it right now. Well, so in honor of the NBA Finals, what's that?
I was not able to watch it today.
Oh. So in honor of the finals, here we have a sentence. He is playing basketball to stay healthy. Now here, playing looks like it could be a participle, but in this case, it is a regular verb. How do we know that? Well, here are the clues. There's two clues here. One, and we saw this earlier in the passage in Ephesians. One is, notice there's a subject, he, and a verb of being, is. Or it's called a helping verb in this case. He is what playing. So is playing is the full verb here.
A continuous action.
Yes. Is playing is the verb in this sentence. Now, why is it done this way? Well, this is the way in English. This tells us it is an ongoing action happening right now. Okay? Because you could say he plays basketball. Plays would be a present tense, but that just could mean he's a basketball player, right? He plays basketball. It doesn't necessarily tell us what he's doing right now, but if you were to say he is playing basketball, that's telling us it's happening this very moment. Okay? So there are different ways you could represent. He plays basketball. He played basketball. So that's past tense. So that's telling us something he did in the past. He plays basketball as present tense, but it's not telling us exactly when he's playing. Now, if it's he is playing basketball, this is ongoing now. Now, what if I said he was playing basketball? Well, that was ongoing in the past. Okay? That's the difference. So, what do you need to do? If you see this verb with an ing ending, you might say, oh, participle. Well, wait a minute. Slow yourself down and first ask the question. Okay, is there a verb of being in front of the word? Okay, and that would be is, are, was, be, am, right? Okay, so look for that. And then secondly, you can ask, is there a subject? You guys follow me? If the answer to these two questions is yes, then it is a regular verb. So it won't modify. It's not a participle. Okay? Regular verb, right? So that's the first thing to look for here. All right. If you see a word that looks like a participle, first ask, okay, is there a verb of being in front of it? And is there a subject? And notice he is the verb of being, and there's a subject he. So playing is not a participle. Okay. Now, what about the gerund? That is, this is a verb plus ing, which functions as a noun. Okay. The playing of basketball helps him stay healthy. Well, here, notice, there's my word playing again, but this time it's not a regular verb and it's not a participle. It's acting like a noun here. It's the subject of the sentence. And a clue here that often you'll see is an article in front of it. You see that word the? Verbs don't have articles. Remember again, an articles are the, an, or a, right? The apple, that's a definite article because it's identifying a specific apple. An apple that's an indefinite article. It's just saying, any apple. Okay. But if you see an article in front of the word, then it's not a participle. It's this gerund. It's telling you it's a noun. Articles only go with nouns. Now, the trick is sometimes a gerund won't have an article. So, like, for example, I could have said, playing basketball helps him stay healthy. Now, no article in front of it here. How would I know whether or not playing is a participle or the gerund? Any ideas?
Because of the verb
Yeah, what's the verb?
helps.
Helps is my verb. And notice it's not basketball helps him stay healthy. It's playing basketball helps him stay healthy. Playing basketball is my noun. It's our subject, sorry, which means it's a noun. So, like I told you before, you have to sort of stop and say, okay, what is the word doing in this sentence? Okay, I see the verb. That's good. Him is the object. Helps him. Playing basketball is the subject of the sentence. So I know if it's a subject, subject is always a noun or a noun phrase. Okay? So I know if it's a noun, it can't be a participle. Participles are not nouns. Participles always modify. Participles are not nouns or verbs. Okay? They always modify. That is a participle will always act like an adjective or an adverb. Follow me? Adjective and adverbs modify. Nouns and verbs do not modify. That's just the way they work in English. So if I have something that's a subject, that means it's a noun. That means it doesn't modify. If I have something that's a verb, that means it doesn't modify. So playing basketball is the subject here. That is what helps him. And really, we should stay healthy. Questions? All right. So that leaves us with this. Participles will have no subject or no article. No subject, no article, or verb of being. Okay, so for example here, he stays healthy playing basketball every Saturday. There's no verb of being, there's no article, there's no subject. All right, he stays healthy. That's my independent clause. Playing basketball every Saturday, that is technically two phrases here. And it's modifying stays. How does he stay healthy? Playing basketball. When does he play? Every Saturday. Okay. Now, here's something to keep in mind as well. Remember that I said participles are verbal. So even though they don't act like a regular verb, they have some verbal elements or aspect to it. For example, in this case, every Saturday identifies it when, right? And if you remember, when something happens, that's usually modifies an action. So playing basketball is an action. It's an activity, right? But playing is not a regular verb here, but it has some verbal elements to it, meaning there's some elements of an action involved, right? Playing is an action. Diba? So that's why this every Saturday can modify playing, even though playing's not a regular verb, it has some verbal idea. So every Saturday doesn't modify stays, right? It's not telling us when he stays healthy. It's telling us when he plays basketball. So it's modifying playing. You guys see that? Okay. All right, so what I'd like to do is let's do a few examples together. So I'll give you guys each one of these, and I just want you to tell me how the word that looks like a participle, is it functioning like a participle, or is it a gerund, or is it a regular verb? Okay, so indicate whether the word is a participle, gerund, or verb. Okay. So let me start with Kazot on this one. Just read the sentence. Tell me what the word that looks like a participle is, and tell me if it's acting like a participle.
Elders should be equipping the saints regularly. It is not a participle.
Okay, what's the word we're looking at?
Equipping.
Equipping. Okay, so you're saying it's not a participle. What is it? And how do you know?
It is a regular verb.
How do you know that?
Subject, verb.
Yeah, remember, what are the two
It,
things to look for?
it acts as a modifier.
What do we need to look for? Remember those
We
two
need
questions?
a subject, elders.
Yes, it has a subject, doesn't it?
Uh,
And notice
that
there
word
is that
should
verb
be.
of being there. Do you see that? Be.
Yes, be.
Okay. So does it have a verb of being in before it?
Yes.
And it does. Yes. Uh, does it have a subject? Yes. Elders. Okay. So um, so equipping is not a participle. It is a regular verb. So therefore, it doesn't modify in the sentence, right? Because it's a verb. Remember, verbs don't modify. So it's the action of the subject. Elders should be equipping the saints. So should be equipping is my verb, and then the saints is my object. When? Regularly. Okay. Alan, I'll give you the next one. Go ahead and read the sentence and then tell us. Again, I use the same word equipping for all these examples. Go ahead and unmute yourself too.
Sorry. The equipping of the saints is the job of an elder. Equipping.
Yep, equipping. And what's it doing in the sentence here?
Uh, it's an article.
Yeah, notice there's an article in front of it, isn't there? So what is that telling us? Is equipping a participle or something else?
It's a gerund.
Yes. So a gerund, remember?
Noun. Noun.
Yes. And again, we could see this in the sentence, the equipping of the saints, the equipping is the subject of my sentence as well, right? So just asking ourselves, okay, what's it doing? How's it functioning in the sentence? Since it's a subject, that means it's a noun. Okay, it's not a participle. Okay. All right, James, I'll give you the next one here.
Finish a blood pressure. It went in the hands every Sunday. Subject is he, it went in. It went in. Is it a participle, start in?
Yes, it's equipping, and equipping is a participle here. Okay. And how can we figure that out? What are the things we want to ask ourselves? Is there a verb of being in front of it? And here we look, say, nope, there's no is or be or are in front of it. So the answer to that is no. Is there a subject? Nope. No, he is a good preacher. Preacher is the object, right? Subject is he is good as a preacher. That is the object of the sentence. So it's not the subject of equipping. Okay, so there's no subject for equipping. Is there an article? You know, the or and, or sorry, the or a or an, right? No article. So it looks like it's a participle. Okay, and in this case, it's modifying is. It's telling us how. By the way, every Sunday modifies equipping, telling us when the equipping is happening. Okay. All right, good. All right, Pastor Arn. Let's do another one. Here I used equipped with an ed ending this time rather than the ing, but how is it functioning here, Pastor Arn?
Okay. Pastor Bob equipped the saints from his sermon. Equip her is verb.
Yes, it is a verb. Okay. And it's ed ending to tell us that is past tense.
Yes.
Okay, because notice no verb of being in front of it. No, there's a subject, Bob, and there's no article either, but there is a subject. So that's telling us it's a regular verb.
Yes.
Okay, very good. Noor.
Yes. Pastor Bob's sermon resulted in equipped saints. Wow,
Yeah, it's a little bit more tricky here. We have two words that end in ed, don't we?
resulted and equipped.
Okay, so let's look at resulted first.
There is no an article, there is no verb.
But
So
is
it
there a
is,
subject?
yes.
Yes, there is. The sermon. So this resulted is a regular verb here. Okay, how about equipped?
And equipped. Still a verb.
All right, what's the subject then?
The saints, no?
No, it's modifying saints. It's telling us something about the saints, right? The saints are equipped. They're equipped saints. Right? Think of it this way. We could have said Pastor Bob's sermon resulted in godly saints. Godly is modifying saints. It's telling us something about saints, right?
Oh,
So equipped is doing the same thing here. It's telling us something about the saints. So
good.
in this case, right, there's no subject.
Oh.
So this is one that's a little bit harder because you have to sort of talk out and think about, okay, what's it doing in the sentence? And here it's describing the saints. It's telling us something about the saints. So equipped here is a participle. All right, and it's acting like
An
it is
adjective, Pastor
acting.
Tim?
Excuse me?
Acting like an adjective?
Yes, because it's modifying the noun. Okay. All right, that one's a little more challenging. Questions on that? Kazot, why don't you do the next one?
The equipped are strengthened by Pastor Bob's sermons. Equip and strengthen.
Okay, so we have equipped and strengthened, both N and ED. Let's look at this. So let's start with equipped. Let's
There's an
ask our,
article.
yeah, you see the article, don't you, right? There is an article, which means equipped is a noun.
And there's a verb of being, are.
Yeah, now for strengthened, yes. There is a verb of being in front of it. So that tells us
The
it
equipped is
is,
the subject.
yes, very good. So
Regular
equipped,
verb are strengthened.
so equipped is the subject of the sentence, and strengthened is not a participle, it's a regular verb. Because there's, notice, strengthened has a subject, the equipped, and there's a verb of being in front of it, are. That means strengthen is, it's just telling us it's a past tense verb. Okay? Questions on that? All right. Let's look at a couple passages here and then we'll finish up for today because I can tell I see a little bit of blood coming out of your nose. So let's just do a couple of passages and then we'll take a break for this morning. All right. Arn, I'm going to have you read this passage for me, please. Ephesians 4, 11 and 12.
Ephesians chapter 4, 11 to 12. And he gave some as apostles, and some as prophets, and some as evangelists, and some as pastors and teachers for the equipping of the saints for the work of service to the building up of the body of Christ. Yes.
So do we see any possible participles here?
Equipment and building is followed by the article, therefore it's not are not participles. Am I right?
Correct. No, good. It has an article. Therefore, it is a noun,
Yes.
not a participle. Okay? Good. Any other possibilities?
So you are looking for participles, Pastor?
Yeah, or possible ones.
Give some as I believe Pastor is nothing, right?
There's one more possible one, building here, right?
Not possible. There is one, another one.
Yeah, you see building
Equipping,
there?
building man. I am answering equipping and building. And there's another one, Pastor.
No, not just those two. What about building here? Is that a participle?
No, it is a subject because of in the article.
Yes, same thing as equipping. So they're both nouns. So there's no
Yes, Pastor.
participles. There's no participles in this passage.
Yes.
Two nouns. Okay. And here, notice there's a preposition to, and because this building is not a verb, to the building up is a prepositional phrase. It's not an infinitive. Okay. So yeah, building and equipping, they look like they could be participles, but in this case, they're not. And the thing that gives it away is the article. Very good. All right, Alan, I'll have you read this passage. This will be the last one we look at. And if you could, Ephesians 2:19 to 22.
So then you are no longer strangers and aliens, but you are fellow citizens with the saints and are of God's household, having been built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Christ Jesus himself being the cornerstone, in whom the whole building, being fitted together, is growing into a holy temple in the Lord, in whom you also are being built together into a dwelling of God in the Spirit.
All right, this one's a little more complicated. So verse 19, we'll start with that. Alan, do you see any in verse 19?
Possible.
Any possible?
There's none in
verse 19. Correct. How about verse 20?
Having.
Yes. Having. Does that look like a participle or not? What do you think? Again, just ask the questions first. Do you see a verb of being in front of it?
Yes, yes.
Where? In front of it.
Yes, in front of it.
Do you see it? See one?
Been.
No, that's following it.
Okay.
Not in front of it. That's why I made sure to emphasize that.
So in front is before.
Yeah, before it. Yeah. Is there a verb of being? Should I say it that way? Is that before it? Yeah. Not after it. And there's not in this case, right?
Okay.
And then you ask, is there an article?
No.
No article. Then you
No
ask,
article.
is there a subject? And household is not the subject. It goes with God, right? God's household. So we don't see a subject there. So what is that telling us? That this is likely what?
Then
If there's no, these questions, the answer is no to all of them, then it's likely going to be a participle. Okay.
so it's still a verb, Pastor Tim, right?
No, because there's no verb of being in front of it. We don't have is having been or something like that. And there's no article like the or an, and there's no subject here to it. So it's not a regular verb in this case. It is a participle. And it's modifying uh,
You.
well, it could be you or are. Why they are no longer strangers and aliens. Because
Are having.
the reason, having been built.
So
It could
that's
modify you as well.
so,
Yeah, I think maybe you is probably a good, it's describing you. So this is how we would diagram this probably. So then, you are no longer strangers and aliens. Then we have but, coordinating conjunction. So it's going to be parallel to you are no longer strangers, but you are fellow citizens. Where are you fellow citizens? With the saints. And again, this coordinating conjunction. So it's you are fellow citizens with the saints and same subject, you are of God's household, having, oops, and I would say, yeah, it goes under you. You having been built on the foundation, which foundation of the apostles and prophets. Okay. And then, all right, just are there any others in verse 21 there? 20, sorry, Alan, and then I'll have someone else.
20
Yeah,
being.
Being, yeah. And again, notice no verb of being, no is or are or anything before it, and no article, no subject. So this is a participle as well, describing Christ. All right. All right, Nur. Let me ask you, verse 21. Do you see any possible participles?
Building.
Huh?
Building.
Okay.
Building.
And then we ask, do you see an article in front of it?
No.
Well, notice the here, the whole building.
The whole.
Yeah, the is modifying building.
Okay.
So building is a noun here.
So, yeah, it's not a participle.
Yeah. Okay, any other possibilities? Verse 21.
Growing.
Yeah, okay, we have growing here, but look in
There is.
front of it. Is there a verb of being?
Yes.
There is. So it's not a participle, it's a regular verb.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other in verse 21? I see
Fitted.
one. Being. You see it?
Being.
Yeah. Now this one, is there a verb of being in front of it? Is there is, are, be,
No.
am? No. Is there an
No.
article?
No.
No article. Is there a subject?
In whom the whole building.
Yeah.
The building is the subject.
Well, let's see.
Yep.
In whom the building, it doesn't say is being fitted. It says the
Oh.
building is growing.
Oh, okay.
So being fitted is actually a participle here. All right, and this is how we would diagram. In whom modifies Christ. In whom the whole building, and being fitted modifies building. Building is growing. So being fitted is splitting that. Okay, and I ran out of room here. Okay. Into a holy temple in the Lord modifies growing there. Okay. So being fitted is participle. Now let's go to the next in verse 22. Do you see any in verse 22? Nor possible participles.
Are being.
Yeah, we have being again, but notice this time what's in front of it?
There is a verb.
Verb of being. So in this case, it's not a participle.
Not...
You is the subject. Our being built is the verb.
And we have a dwelling.
Okay, there's dwelling here. Yeah, but notice, yeah, a is in front of it. So dwelling here is a noun. So being built is a verb. Notice the verb of being before it, are. And then dwelling is a noun. Notice the article, a. Okay? So I know this is what it would look like. This is in whom's modifying Christ again. You also are being built together. And then into modifies into a dwelling of God. Okay, so that's what we've got. So notice here we had several that looked like participles: building, growing, being built, dwelling, but they weren't. And then we did have a few participles. And again, the trickiness here in English is that all of these are ending in ing, but they are not necessarily participles. So you have to look for, do I see a verb of being before it? Do I see an article before it? Can I identify a subject? So you're just going to have to practice this. One other thing, if you're not sure, all right, so you're going, I don't know. I'm so confused. I can't remember all of these things. What you can do is go to the interlinear. Remember our good friend Bible Hub. So you can go to Bible Hub, and let's just do this here. Okay. And we'll go to Ephesians. Or first, let's do this. Let's hit interlinear, the interlin. Okay, and then we'll go to Ephesians chapter 2. And that was verse 19, I think, right? So let's go to Ephesians here 2. Okay, 2:19. There we are. Actually, we were on, so verse 20. All right, here's that having been built. So let's look and see. Aorist participle passive. I don't know. Can you guys see that on your screen? It's pretty small font there. Can you guys see that in the box? It says aorist passive, aorist participle passive. Oh, okay. So having been built is a participle. All right. And then it says upon the foundation of the apostles and prophets. And then notice there's being. Okay. Let me see. Present participle active. Ah, okay. That was a participle too. And then we keep going. The cornerstone, Christ Jesus, in whom, there's building. So let me see below it. Does it say participle? No, it says noun. So, okay, we were right. The whole building was a noun. All right, being fitted together. There's that being again. Let's see. What does it say? Present participle. Yes. All right, is increasing or is growing. There's that word increasing. Let's see. What does it say? Is that a participle? No. Present indicative active. Verb. Okay. We had another one. In whom you also are being built together. Remember, are being built. We said, we said that was a verb because of that are. Well, let's look. Verb. Present indicative middle. Okay. So you can cheat if you want and look at the interlinear and it'll tell you whether it's a verb or a noun or a participle. But you just got to find it here in the interlinear. Okay. So that's another way to check yourself if you're not sure. I just gave you some tools in English to try to figure it out. You know, look for an article, look for a verb of being, look for a subject. But if you're still confused, you can just go to the interlinear, all right, and look up and see, this says being fitted together is a participle. It says present participle middle. Now you'll notice here, maybe if you can see it, it does say verb. That's just the interlinear designation. It's technically not a full verb, right? It's a participle, but it does say that here, verb, present participle middle. So if you see participle there, it's really a verbal. It's not a verb. So that's not quite correct. But that's the interlinear guys put that there. But look for the word participle and see if it's there. Okay, so again, the interlinear can be a helpful tool for us in a lot of ways. And one of them is to help us identify if we have a participle. And by the way, it'll show you infinitives as well, right? You can look up and see if it's an infinitive in the Greek. But that can take a little longer. I think the better you understand English, you don't have to take those extra steps. But you can do that, all right? If you aren't sure, you can take a look at the interlinear and see, does it tell me, is it an infinitive? Is it participle? Is it a noun? Is it a regular verb? All right. Okay. More than you ever wanted to know, but it's important. It's a necessary evil, like I said. Okay. So next week, Lord willing, we'll we will start working on 2 Timothy together, and we'll just look at the connector words, okay? And we'll just, I'll start working on the assignment with you, and we'll do part of it together, all right? And you can use that, when you do your assignment. We'll just start 2 Timothy 1, verse 1, and we'll just go through and look for connector words and just practice together, okay? And hopefully that'll help you, one, to better understand the connector words, and then two, it'll help, you'll be working on part of your assignment for you. Okay? All right. Questions on anything that we covered or anything else that you have from what we talked about this morning? I mentioned earlier that I got a chance to visit Pastor Knight's church, Pastor Marvin's church, on the weekend, and gave them your greetings and gave them an update. And they were encouraged to hear about you and praying for you. And then Pastor Marvin, he said that in September and October, he is available to do the online. He's going to, I think, look at the example of Christ and discipleship and how he discipled. Now he led. Just I think it'll be a good opportunity. So he said he would be happy to do that with us. Because in September, October, I'm going to be traveling more, so I won't be available consistently with you guys. So I thought that would be a good thing, like a sort of a discipleship lab to do with him, like we did last year. But he's going to have it's going to be other topics. So he wanted to express he regretted not being able to come for the graduation, but did say he would love to be able to spend that time with you guys in September, October. So in the meantime, we're going to keep working on these topics and get on those assignments, guys. I know it's June. November seems like a long way away, but it's going to come here before you know it. So just try to give some time each week. Start knocking those assignments out. All right. So if you can do that now, and by the time we get to August and September, you'll have been able to do several of them, but don't push it out. Just do what you can, okay? All right. So thank you for your time today, brothers. I'm going to ask if Noor, if you could close our time in prayer.